What were the main events of the Russian Revolution? Have you ever wondered how a series of protests could change the course of a nation? The Russian Revolution of 1917 is a prime example of this. It was a turning point that ended centuries of imperial rule and led to the rise of the Soviet Union. Let's break down the main events that shaped this monumental period. The revolution kicked off in March 1917, which is February in the old Russian calendar, in Petrograd, now known as St. Petersburg. People took to the streets, driven by food shortages and the hardships of World War I. Workers, soldiers, and peasants united in their demands for change. As protests escalated, the government lost control, and soldiers began siding with the demonstrators. This unrest forced Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate, marking the end of the Romanov dynasty and the collapse of the Russian Empire. Following the abdication, a provisional government was formed. This government was mainly made up of liberals and moderate socialists who aimed to create a constitutional democracy. They also intended to continue fighting in World War I. However, they faced immediate challenges. The provisional government struggled with land reform, ending the war, and maintaining order. Their authority was further weakened by the Petrograd Soviet, a council of workers and soldiers that often acted independently. In April 1917, Vladimir Lenin returned from exile. He led the Bolshevik Party, a radical socialist group that opposed the provisional government. The Bolsheviks called for immediate peace, land redistribution, and transferring power to the Soviets. Tensions rose over the summer, culminating in the July days, when armed demonstrations erupted. Although the Bolsheviks were temporarily suppressed, Lenin managed to escape. By autumn, the provisional government's failure to address the crises led to dwindling public support. In October 1917, which is November in the Gregorian calendar, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin and Leon Trotsky, staged a coup. They seized key locations in Petrograd, stormed the Winter Palace, and declared the provisional government deposed. Power shifted to the Bolshevik-dominated Congress of Soviets, and a new government called the Council of People's Commissars was formed, with Lenin at the helm. The Bolsheviks quickly moved to consolidate their power. They withdrew Russia from World War I by signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany in March 1918. They also began implementing radical policies, such as nationalizing industries, redistributing land, and suppressing political opposition. These actions ignited a brutal civil war between the Bolsheviks, known as the Reds, and their opponents, called the Whites, which lasted until 1921. From a liberal perspective, the Russian Revolution represents a complex turning point. The fall of the Tsarist regime opened a brief window for liberal reforms and democratic experimentation. The provisional government's attempts to establish a constitutional order and protect civil liberties reflected liberal ideals. However, their inability to meet the population's demands and the rise of the Bolsheviks marked the end of this liberal moment. The Bolshevik takeover resulted in a one-party state that suppressed political pluralism and free speech. The Russian Revolution illustrates the challenges liberal movements face during crises. The provisional government's failure to provide stability and reform allowed more radical forces to gain power. For those interested in liberalism, this revolution serves as a case study on the importance of effective governance and the fragility of democratic institutions in times of social upheaval.